John, I'm so glad you're here with us. You're at the National Aquarium, and I met you last year. And when I saw your presentation about the new business model for aquariums, I just about freaked. So that's why you're here, to tell us all about it.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Well, it's great to be here. And lest anyone wonder, behind me is a live video feed from our black tip reef. And I'm used to being upstaged by Tang, the humphead wrasse, or if a Calypso, the turtle, comes around, then I'm sure that no one will pay attention to what I'm saying. But it's great to be here. Thank you, Lori.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to try to figure out one thing before we even get going, is that how the heck did you end up here? I want to know how you became the head of the National Aquarium and have decided to change what aquariums are going to look like in the future.
Well, that's a pretty simple progression. I mean, I've been in this business for most of my life, as I think you know. I started as a diver many, many years ago at a place that no longer exists called Marine World in San Francisco Bay, but really began my career in the 80s at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And after 10 years there as one of the early employees, I got drafted to go be the CEO and start my own in Tampa, the Florida Aquarium, which I built and opened and ran for its first few years before deciding, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to wash my hands of aquariums and go out and do my own thing, and went back to California and did exactly that for 12 years. And when the phone rang and it was the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and I was a recent empty nester, and my wife and I were saying, where do we want to spend our years? It was a perfect match between where I was in my life and what the aquarium, I think, was ready for here. I've been coming back to the National Aquarium as if going to Mecca since 1984. And going back to that first visit when I was a new squeaky behind the ears marketing chief in Monterey and got a tour of the place with none other than Liberace and his driver. I've always thought Baltimore was a pretty glamorous place. Liberace, then another time I was back, the Queen was here with her royal yacht. And so anyway, it all started here at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. And so for me, coming here was really kind of a natural progression. And it's been a great 4 years since I've been here.
When did you decide to completely change how the aquarium is going to be? When did you decide that when you got the job? What were there pressures, or how did this all come about?
I would say that from the get-go, the aquarium was ready for a significant amount of change. I mean, from before my arrival here, a number of things were going on at the time. The recession was just kind of winding down, but everybody was still feeling the effects of that. The aquarium had just digested the opening of the new Experience Australia Wild Extremes, which was built and completed, I think, in 2008. So it was still pretty new, but it had really had a big impact on everybody here. It increased a lot of, there was more staffing. It cost more to run it. Attendance, as is often the case in our business, didn't go up dramatically. But most importantly, the organization was ready to find its way in terms of mission. And I think that was a pretty good matching of an organization need and a person who was focused on the idea of meeting that need.
Here's the thing. People believe that when we talk about mission and vision, most small business owners their eyes glaze over and they think this is something for a huge corporation. It's not for them. And this is so fundamental. It's basically your why. Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you exist? Why do you want to do this? And for you as a big company, and the aquarium business is a business. How did you get your team around revisioning and reevaluating the whole mission of your organization? Aquariums, I looked this up. Aquariums have been around since the mid 1800s, and the first one was in London as part of the London Zoo. So, I mean, this is a pretty set mentality. It's a pretty set mindset as to what an aquarium should be. So what you guys are doing is you are really breaking this stranglehold of how an aquarium should be looked at. You're really outside the box.
Thank you. It's funny too, because I've in all of my years now, and it is 30 plus in this business, it's always been, in my mind's eye, a significant key part of our role has been to evolve the way people relate to the ocean and aquatic places. It's always been a conservation focus. Even back in the 80s, when it was still not yet fashionable to be, focused on the idea of conservation, we were, because it was in our DNA. And I would have to say that there's been a natural evolution in the United States especially. I think we've been the leaders. There are certainly some progressive aquariums in Canada, a little bit in Japan. I know of at least a couple that are far ahead of their brethren there, even though a lot of them are still back in the kind of early ages of aquariums, and also in Europe. But it's really been led by some aquariums here in the U.S., and that's because we came into it with the belief that that was the right mission for us in the first place. It's come a long way from the days of, being a fish emporium. And to your question, for us, yeah, it was the why statement was probably the first thing that we really looked at. I mean, we first said, okay, let's talk about the mission in the context of not so much where are we trying to go or why we exist, but what is it that we do? And we said, it's a very simple thing that we do. We try to inspire conservation of the world's aquatic treasures. And when we said aquatic treasures, I got everybody kind of on the same, in the room and said, talk to me about what, is it the nation? Is it the world? Is it ocean? No, it's aquatic treasures. It's those places and those communities, human, animal, plant, and otherwise, that are treasures on this planet. And they happen to be linked by the fact that they are aquatic. So that can be a rainforest. That can be a river gorge in Australia. That can be the Atlantic Ocean or a coral reef in the Indo-Pacific. But they're all aquatic treasures. And we believe that humans are part of those aquatic treasures. I mean, we're part of this natural environment that gives us life. That led then to the whole notion of what we now view as our vision, our why statement, and that is we exist to change the way humanity views and cares for the ocean that sustains us. Very simply, to change the way it views and it cares for the ocean that sustains us. Because the ocean sustains us through those aquatic places and treasures. And it is our life support system, as Sylvia, Earl, and other of our mutual friends have reminded us many times. And if the aquarium isn't functioning in a way to get people to realize how relevant the ocean is to their lives, we're totally missing the boat. We can't get away with that kind of a mistake.
So as you walk through this, you go through your vision, you're saying this is our why. Then where did you go next? How did you develop this into this amazing plan that you are going to reveal on this call?
World revelation. Early on, we realized that what we needed to first do was right the ship. The aquarium was in a kind of a doldrum space. And by the way, you'll have to pardon me for all my nautical metaphors. They just come naturally.
I'm going to write them down. I'll need them for copy later.
All right, but no fish puns, I promise. So it was a bit in the doldrums. The aquarium was a little bit lost in terms of what do we do now? Where are we going from here? There was a kind of a disparate experience. There was the dolphin show, which dates to the 1990s. There was Australia, which is a powerful and effective immersion exhibit, but it's one that you really have to learn how to look. And then there was the original aquarium building, which was a little bit more traditional at that time. So getting the ship righted was really a big part of my job. And quite frankly, nature intervened in a terrible and tragic way, but it intervened to kind of shock us to our senses that summer of 2011, because that's when we had 2 baby dolphins born and 2 baby dolphins die in the space of about 6 weeks. And so everybody went from incredibly happy to incredibly depressed, and the public stopped coming, or at least a significant percentage did. And we really, the aquarium was an organization in crisis the day I arrived here. And I remember thinking, okay, we've got to work on this. This won't be great. If we're going to focus on mission, first thing we have to do is, make sure that the trains are running. So that was a big focus for the first really, year while I was here, was to right the ship and then recorrect and reset our course. And quickly we figured out, okay, let's get our exhibit program cleaner and clearer to us, but at the same time, let's think beyond the walls now. Let's start talking about what is it that we're going to do that's going to pursue this newly realized vision. I don't think you create visions. I think you discover them. And I think that happened with my team as we looked at what we were trying to accomplish and said, gosh, really, we're trying to change the way humanity views and cares for the ocean, aren't we? And it sustains us. So let's go there. And that led to this thing we're calling Blueprint, our master plan for the future of the aquarium, for the National Aquarium of the 21st century. One of my jokes to my team was, all right, you guys, we got to get this right so that we're planning for the National Aquarium of the 21st century before the 21st century is halfway over. So that's been our mission, and it's been a good one. It's really led to some interesting revelations. As I discussed at the Blue Ocean Festival last year, one of the things we realized was maybe it's time to rethink the way that we interact with the dolphins in our care. And that inquiry continues, but it's leading us in some very, very interesting directions. We realized that our exhibit program needed to be more linked to our much developed and emerging conservation focus. I brought in a really talented guy as our Chief Conservation Officer, Eric Schwab from NOAA. He's done a fantastic job really kind of outlining and strategizing the ways that we can take care of our own backyard here at the Chesapeake Bay, do more in the way of ocean science innovations, be more of a resource in terms of ocean conservation education, and then finally to really link all that back together so people get the connection between this beautiful aquarium that they're seeing and the inner harbor behind it and the Chesapeake Bay beyond and the world ocean that's all attached there. So that's been a big part of it. We had to rethink our mission in D.C. because we ran the oldest aquarium in the country for the longest time, National Aquarium in D.C. We had to close it down, and we had to make a hard decision not to devote a huge amount of resources to trying to rebuild it somewhere else in the capital. And then finally, we really spent a lot of time talking about what is going to be relevant for aquaria in the next 35 years. Because in 35 years and with 50 million guests so far, I think we've become something very different from what was opened here in 1981. It's incumbent on us to try to think about what might be the case here in the year 2050. But it's the right thing to try and do so that the people that come after us will be able to continue to evolve this mission and pursue this vision.
So this is what I'm trying to figure out. When you were visioning forward, when you're looking into the future, how did you go about that? Or I know you're still doing it. It's like an ongoing process. But how do you look to the future? Because it's so hard to get out of business as usual. And this is in the dive industry. We're stuck in business as usual. We're not thinking to 2050 when they say the coral reefs were going to be gone. We're not thinking there. So help us with your process.
Okay. Well, and I do feel like in this instance, I'm preaching to the choir as a, it shocks me to tell people it shocks people as much as it shocks me to tell them I've been a certified diver for 45 years, but I go all the way back to an early time, in the late 60s when the idea of being a scuba diver was still a pretty bizarre idea. All through that time, though, it's become clearer and clearer to me that the key in this is to get people to care about the ocean. And the more that they care about it, the more they're going to care for it. And whenever I say this, I remind people that it's not an original thought. It is an original thought by my mentor and spiritual guide, Sylvia Earle, who also is probably one of the best divers I've ever spent time underwater with. But more importantly, and that's because it's a truism. It's one of those universal truths. And if we can get people who aren't divers, who aren't out there in that environment like we are all the time, if we can get them to understand how valuable the ocean is to their lives, then I think we can get them to care more, to do a better job of caring for the ocean, again, that sustains us. And that, in our case, means rethinking the role of all of the models that we currently have. So when you're an aquarium, you've got to be looking at how can you use your bully pulpit to tell people that these are places at risk and not scare them, but inspire them. I think if you're a dive operator or if you're a dive manufacturer, a lot of it is to get people to realize that this cool gear that you're making or these incredible dive trips that you are marketing are an opportunity for people to learn how to be better stewards themselves for the ocean, or better, or to better show people the beauty that they see there with their new cool GoPro or their newest Nikonos camera. All these things, I think, are ways that we collectively can cause the landlubbers, of whom there are far more than the rest of us ocean people, cause them to really understand that the ocean matters in their lives too. And that's something I think every one of us has got to be a part of. Now, you asked, how did we make that kind of transition here? I can't give you a direct answer on that because I think it came in 1,000 different ways, but I think ultimately focusing on that central vision, remembering why we're doing what we're doing, and forgetting about the fact that we have these sort of how and what type questions that we answer to. We're not an aquarium that shows off great, habitat exhibits. We're an organization that is working to change the way humanity views the ocean and cares for it and understands that it gives us life. And if we can do all that, the aquarium is just one of the great ways that we convey that message.
It's the major tool, right? Rather than being the thing, it is the tool.
That's right.
This is exactly why I wanted you on the summit, is because this is how the dive industry, the people in the dive industry who are doing really well, are doing what you're doing. They're using their businesses as a tool to connect people to a greater vision, a greater purpose, and deeper meaning in their lives, and a true understanding of how we actually survive on this planet is because of this beautiful ocean that we love. And for you to say this, I just want people to just kind of close their eyes and say, what is my why, and how am I going to convey this to my people through my business? And then the business, this is when people, it just drives people crazy, business owners crazy, when other business owners are doing really, really well, and they go, well, how do you make all the money? And they go, well, I don't really focus on the money. I mean, I think about it, but it's not like the major focus. And it just wigs people out. And this is what you're doing. You're talking about things are in the doldrums, things, you're having trouble getting more people through the door. You've invested all this money, and it's not showing up in the receipts. But then you turn around and said, no, we've got to revisit what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then the actual business is the tool by which we carry out our why. Mm-hmm. And it seems backwards to a lot of people, but it's actually the way it's going to work moving forward in any kind of a sustainable business model.
I agree. It's inside out, not outside in.
What are some of the conventional pieces of wisdom that you question that has helped to switch everything around?
I think one of the first was that it would be damaging or negative to talk about conservation in a setting like this. I think there has been a conventional wisdom that's prevailed for decades that, we're here to entertain these guys, we'll sneak in a little education, but don't bum them out. We figured out we're not bumming them out if we talk about coral reef bleaching, but we also talk about the beauty of, healthy coral reefs and what they need to remain healthy and thriving. Or now our newest exhibit that opens right now is called Living Seashore, and it is it's touch pools, but it's talking to people in a language they can understand about how valuable it is to have, first of all, what's going on in the water around their ankles and in the sand beneath their feet, but also how valuable it is to be a beach hero, a shoreline hero. And we've got models of that allow people to kind of go off and be a shore hero themselves. So we really, the real focus of all this is hope. That we're focused on engaging visitors in the learning, and by doing that, we get them to actually step up and take action to be doers. And so far, so good. We're getting a lot more of that kind of engagement. The second was to remember that, we run an aquarium, that's true, and it's a big one, and 1.5 million people a year trot through here, and it's, one of the nation's best and one of the world's greatest, and yet we're just reaching a pittance. And so all the other channels available to us have got to be fully exploited if we're ever going to really scale this. The reason I quit doing my wonderful, fun, but ultimately not consequential consulting out in San Francisco, working with Surfrider and IUCN and all these great organizations, was that I realized I couldn't scale. I couldn't get my message out further than the limitations of the clients I was working with. So I got no excuse here. And I've got a social media team that's, outstanding. And they're out there. If you go to our Facebook or our Twitter feed or our Instagram, you'll figure out it's an aquarium. We call ourselves that. But a lot of the imagery you're going to see is about ocean subjects and topics and conservation issues and things that our team's doing together. Right now, the big one we're doing on social is called 48 Days of Blue. And it's each day, there's 48 days between Earth Day and World Ocean Day on June 8th. And each of those 48 days, we have a huge following now, tens of thousands. There's little things that you can do as an ocean lover to make a difference on behalf of the ocean. And for 48 days, you kind of follow this recipe and you check the box and you get to sort of say, I did it. And you really are making lifestyle changes that are replicable, that you can actually then use, and you can tell your family and your mom and your dad or your kids or whoever you are to do these things too. And today's is cut your shower shorter by 30 seconds. But it's simple stuff and it's valuable stuff. And there's this whole kind of, our brand is about trying to inspire people to become what we call hopeful conservationists. People who believe that they have a part to play, who understand that hope is much more powerful than fear and loathing and all the other bad things, and who recognize that if they exercise their individual capacity to do that, ultimately, collectively, we will make a difference positively. And if we don't have hope, we don't have life. And I happen to believe that life is a good thing, and I happen to believe that hope is the right way to go into our lives. So we've really made that our brand, and it seems to be getting through.
I think this is exactly what our industry needs to hear, because we're having trouble with people thinking beyond the bricks and mortar, and you've decided to take that on and use social media. And I want to ask you, how did you get out into the community other than through your social media? Are you doing other ways to tie in? I know you're doing your Chesapeake Bay what is that, aquarium? It's a restoration. You're doing the restoration of the Oh my gosh! I mean, I wish we had a picture of what you're doing. It's really amazing. Maybe we'll get it from you and we'll post it on the website so people can see it. But are you somehow tying your regulars in, your donors in? How are you getting the community of Baltimore more involved in what's in their own backyard? Because I'm sure, my hometown is Ottawa, and living there, I never went to the Parliament buildings. I never went to the National Gallery. I never went to the museums. So how do you get your local citizenry to your aquarium?
I think there's as many ways to do it as there are, diversity of people that we're trying to get here. But we, span the spectrum from, first of all, we try to get them early. And I don't know if there's a parallel with this in the business side of industry, but for us, getting kids young and through school programs, which we offer free, year in and year out, 2.5 million kids so far. Somewhere like 160,000 kids a year come here in school programs free of charge and get the full scope of the experience. And it becomes part of growing up in the mid-Atlantic region is to go many times to the National Aquarium. Of course, it's a great way to, prospect for future employees. A lot of our employees say, oh yeah, I got this great picture, and they show me this photo of them, at the age of like 2 out in front of the aquarium. And I go, I was 40 that year. But it's beyond that. Then we have a volunteer program here that now touches, I think it's something like, we've got over 1,000 of our daytime volunteers. We've also got 160 divers. And then we have another 1,000 volunteers who come and episodically join us on the restoration and cleanup programs that we do around the bay. So again, these are ways that you engage people. So far, we haven't even talked about going to the aquarium. We've talked about, everything else. And then lastly, we're very focused on access. We've come to realize that, we've been given great assets. We have this fabulous aquarium. It commands a healthy admission price. It's competitive, it's fair, but it's also still a lot of money if you're a disadvantaged family. And so we look at ways, especially in our home market here, to create better access for families outside of the high season when we can afford to do things like have $1 days for Baltimore residents, offer a Maryland mornings discount for Marylanders, or even a new program we started this last winter, and it was a runaway success, Pay What You Want. We said, come on down, it's your aquarium, all day Sunday, it's pay what you want. And people averaged a $5 per person donation. It's a lot less than the $35 it costs to get in for an adult. But I thought what I was amazed by was only a handful of people actually said, oh, I think I'll go in for free. So, we're doing more of that. It's all focused on our kind of home market. But that's all ways that you can kind of attract people into your, to start to grasp this. Ultimately for us, and I think there is a parallel in the dive industry for this, we try to create we focus on the lifetime value of the so-called customer or client. We want to teach people that the aquarium is an asset that they're going to utilize throughout their life. And when they're a kid, it's one thing. When they're a teenager, it's quite another. When they get to be a young adult, it becomes a completely different experience. And when they have kids of their own, it takes on a new patina. And now, of course, the boomers are all showing up with their grandkids, while their millennial kids are working to sustain them in their glory years. But we really have refocused our energy on the millennials and the much higher level of self-awareness and commitment to, principles like conservation and sustainability that I think millennials carry as a generation than even their predecessors, than even the baby boomers and the tweeners. And I think that's really an important thing for all of us, is to be focused on that, because these are people that are saying, what's the purpose? What's behind this? You want my loyalty? Well, show me what you've done lately that's good for me or for the planet or for society as a whole. And if you're an aquarium, you can't just say, we have a beautiful fish tanks. You've got to say, we're improving the community, we're creating jobs, we're providing resources outside of our building, we're taking care of our environs, all those things. And I think that plays exactly as well with any business. You have got to stay relevant. If you're not relevant, you don't have meaning.
You're obsolete. And this is one of the things I keep coming across is that much of the dive industry was established by the boomers, and we still have the same mindset, and we think that everybody else thinks like us. And then, as you rightfully are saying, the movers and shakers who are coming up, they're not just looking for pretty things and entertain me. They're looking for who is behind this business or this attraction, and they want to know what you stand for and what your values are and what you are doing, other than just trying to get people through the door, what you're actually doing to contribute back to the community.
Right.
And this is where we're going, and I worry about some of our industry members who really haven't captured this yet, because they haven't really seen the tremendous influence this younger generation has coming through. And they wonder how can we grow the industry? How can we capture more young people? How can we get young people into the industry? And yet they're not willing to really start connecting to the ocean and the value of it, and how we all are stewards of it. And we have to be voices for the ocean and use our businesses as vehicles to help preserve it, or we're done. It's not there yet. So we're trying to connect the dots for these people who are still circling, saying, how do we grow the industry? How do we get young people involved?
The bottom line question that we've been asking ourselves for the last couple of years now, and I think it applies to anybody that's in any kind of business, is if our audience is changing, how can we afford not to change? And, when I think about diving as an industry, I think divers are the ultimate ecotourists. And with all the kind of misinformation and misapplication of that concept that's gone on in this world, where, a company comes along and builds some big resort that has a huge footprint and eats up a ton of energy and produces lots and lots of carbon and discharges waste into the ocean, all that stuff, and then calls it itself an eco resort. There's a lot of that kind of, fraud in the business of ecotourism. The one place where I think we really can say that every person that plops into the water, whether a diehard, truly, long time experienced diver or a brand new one, is an ecotourist, because they're going through a true, pardon the pun, immersion experience, but also they're going to a place that people don't go. I mean, people, even the most dive places, even Pennicamp State Park off Key Largo is still can be a transformational experience for people. And I think there's something there. There's something to be utilized there. And I think millennials get that. I think they look at the dive experience as something more than a recreational thing. They look at it as something that's both recreational and physical, but also something that has this deeper, kind of meaning and purpose.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because some dive operators are associated with some of these big resorts that may never even talk about being ecotourism. They're just 5-star luxury resorts, and that's what they do, and they have the biggest environmental footprint of all. And yet the dive operator is running ecotourism because they are guiding people through natural, fragile environments. That's the bottom line.
And those environments, whether the hotel is 12 rooms or 1,200, are nonetheless as fragile and important as in one case as in the other. We led a trip in concert with Ecology, which is a great NGO that's very diver focused. We partnered with them to take a group of people to the Jean-Michel Cousteau Resort in Fiji last summer. And that is a true ecotourism resort, and they are treading lightly on the land, and they are doing one of the things that I think they're doing that a lot of other places could learn from is there is a legitimate give back program. So you're not only of course you're paying your licensing fee, and that includes money for forget the name now of the marine protected area there, which is some of the most stunning diving certainly in the world in the South Pacific. But they're also supporting. And that's where Ecology came into the equation. They're supporting the energies and programs of a couple of the villages where a lot of their employees live and work. So it's a real, there's a real beneficial aspect in both directions. But their central focus is that they are a takeoff point for, some of the greatest diving that you can find in those islands. It fits together. And, it doesn't hurt to have Jean-Michel's name on your resort, but and it was enough to inspire my 60-plus-year-old wife. She's proud of this fact. That's why I can say it. To get certified, and she's now a diver. And it's been, 27 years of marriage. I've been waiting for this day, and now I've got a dive buddy. So I think these kinds of positive changes do occur, and I think you have to hew to your values, though. That's true.
Yeah, you can't just do the greenwashing. The young people smell it. They can smell it a mile away, and they just blow you off. And this is what us older folks don't really understand, is that the younger generation is much more sophisticated, much more savvy, much more jaded than we are. And they just don't put up with it. They just don't even walk in the door. And they've done their homework. That's the thing. They're on their phones and they're scrolling and they're doing their homework, and they won't even bother with us if there's even a hint of greenwashing or just papering over.
Inauthenticity. Yeah. Well, and again, I don't think you can be relevant and be inauthentic. I don't think you can do things that matter to people if what you're doing is subterfuge. Is not really what you say you're doing is not what you are doing. Walk your talk, whatever the terminology you want to use. And I think that also applies in any business line, and certainly in this industry. The more that you can do what you say and say what you do, and that can be things that are, in fact, relevant and helpful to the ocean environment, I think the more that you can attract people to your business. That's just a natural axiom.
What you said about Jean-Michel Cousteau's resort, where they are actually giving back to the community and helping those local communities that provide employees to the resort, that's very similar what you are doing with your Chesapeake Bay
Sure.
conservation initiatives, and you're allowing access to those less free cash, spare cash to throw around on an
Uh-huh.
entry ticket. You're doing that for them. So there's a tremendous amount of similarities. Now going back to Jean-Michel Cousteau, I've been talking to him.
Yeah.
He's been talking about you.
Oh, he's an old buddy, and he's a great guy, and he's really, talk about somebody that stayed relevant. He's even older than me, and he is out there still staying out on the edge of some of these issues that confront us as ocean people and as divers. And I think between Jean Michel and Sylvia, you've got two people who absolutely get that, and they have taken that with them through their lives, and they're both still very relevant to the world that we're trying to save.
I always think of them as holding the space for us, waiting for us to get it, And I think we're finally getting it. I think we're heading for critical mass. I know Jean-Michel, one of his favorite, the closest to his heart is marine mammals in captivity. And when I spoke to him at Beneath the Sea, we hung around a lot together. It was really great. And he did a presentation, and he talked about how he, as a youngster, he would go and visit the Monaco Aquarium, where his father was the head of the aquarium, and he could see them going out in the boats into the Mediterranean and capturing wild dolphins and bringing them back. And one wild dolphin, they put her in a separate aquarium, and he would go by on his way to school. He was like very young, and he would see her, and he noticed that she was not well, and he called the vet over and said, "You got to go see, there's a problem with the dolphin." And they said, "No, no, no," and they checked the dolphin out several times, and after a few weeks, he went into the aquarium, and she had died in the aquarium, and they discovered that she had smashed her head against the side of the aquarium. They believe she committed suicide. And this was emblazoned in him, being a youngster. And ever since then, he has been so concerned about any marine mammals in captivity. And this brings me to you, because I know you both have been talking about this initiative of yours to start reducing the whole dolphin aspect of your aquarium. Can you just give us an overview of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's one facet of this whole grander sort of scheme of blueprint, but it's an important one, and it's one that began with a lot of self searching and asking questions. But the short story is that after I arrived here, and certainly after the tragedy of the two calves dying, which happens in nature, and it certainly happens in an aquarium setting, but nonetheless, it's a totally depressing thing for everybody, the humans, the dolphins, the guests. We decided that, first of all, we needed to put a moratorium on breeding the dolphins, that the functional setting that they're in was incompatible with the idea of doing shows and also breeding. Then we kind of considered the notion of whether shows were the right thing, and ultimately we decided they weren't. And so we took that out of the equation in 2012 and did something called Dolphin Discovery, and that's evolved into really a kind of an enhanced learning session throughout the day, but it's basically, we call it the Dolphin Exhibit now. It's not a show. It's a little odd because there's this big amphitheater and people walk in and sit down and go, "Okay, where's the show?" And we say, "Well, there isn't one anymore, but let me tell you all about these dolphins and why they do what they do." But the next step in that inquiry was to decide what is the highest and best way that we can still care for these dolphins. Because ultimately, their health and welfare are at our highest priorities. And we are going to have to spend a lot of money to recondition the building that they live in, Pier 4, over the course of the next 10 years. That's just nature of things. It's a 25-year-old building. It's had about 7 trillion gallons of salt water pumped through it. And as we all know, salt water's kind of hard on metal and concrete and other substances. So it's going to get a major makeover. And the question was, can we do better for these dolphins in this setting? Um, and if so, at what cost? And that inquiry continues, and we're looking at three alternatives, but it's unlikely that we can do what we want to do with them here. So we are looking at the options that include moving them to a different location. And so we are, without apology, looking at the idea of a dolphin sanctuary. We're looking all over the United States, and the southeastern United States mostly, and also the Caribbean. That decision will be made by our board this summer. The decision to either pursue the sanctuary option or try to figure out if we can do something on site. And I can't give any previews about which way it's turning, but it's a very, very reasoned and thoughtful discovery process. And it also includes a lot of consideration about, well, what else could we do here on site if in fact we didn't have the dolphins? Because again, we're trying to look at several things, and the first is always, what is the most effective way to convey this mission and to accomplish the vision that we've set out? And we'll always keep that as our touchstone.
Well, the where it's going with trends with dolphinariums, you are on track to question this. What do you think's going to happen? There's such a big outcry recently with SeaWorld and other shows, marine mammal shows. You are on target to be seriously questioning what your role is. If you were to choose not to continue doing these dolphin shows, have you ever thought of the impact it may have, just the ripple effect it may have on other aquariums and other dolphinariums if you said we're not doing this anymore?
Sure, we have, and I have to say that having looked at that, we've also said we need to do what's right for us and what's right for the 8 dolphins in the colony that lives here. Because another one of our key precepts was we decided we really want to keep these 6 females and 2 males together. They've all grown up together. 6 of the 8 were born here. 7 of the 8 have never been in the ocean. So it's an incredibly complex and actually very exciting scientific inquiry to look at how this process could happen. How would we make sure that they could make a transition safely, that the microbiomes that exist on them bacterially would evolve to match that in whatever setting they went to over time. But we've spent most of our energy really looking at the impact here. We've also looked at the impact on our community. There are a lot of people here who grew up with these dolphins and that are, the same age as them. And so one of the edicts that I put out early on was, okay, guys, if in fact our dolphins go to live in some cool new lagoon in Georgia or Florida or BVI's, I want them to be able to still see home, and I want home to still be able to see them. And so all of our scenarios include the idea of some kind of digital link. Dolphin Skype is our kind of in-house name for it, but ideas that could keep that linkage and that the dolphins could continue to interact with the people, because we have to face it, these dolphins are in our care for the rest of their natural lives, and we want those to be long. So we've got to make a long-term commitment, and that's a big part of our consideration. It's less so thinking about its impact on others, only because we can only influence that's within our sphere. And yes, we have been watching very closely to see what public attitudes are doing, and we do believe that they're changing, and it is viable, it is arguable that this may be a watershed kind of moment for this practice, if you pay attention to all the changes that have occurred in the last 2 years. But again, we're looking at the relevance of it to our experience, and then we're hoping that we can do the right thing, and if we can help others, we certainly want to, but we also don't want this to be looked at as us trying to teach a lesson to others that are in this business. I don't think that's our role.
I love it when you talk about science, and then I look back at your presentation and you talked about those dolphins like they were your children, and how much you love them and how much you're worried about what could happen to them if they're not taken care of, if they're not kept together. And I went, oh my gosh, this man, yes, the science backs up whatever you're going to do, but truly, your team loves these animals and are concerned about them, and you don't want anything to happen to them because you made a certain decision that went awry. And I totally get that. I mean, it means it's from the heart. I mean, the whole. I looked around the room and people went, "Oh, that's so beautiful," and it is beautiful. It's beautiful that you know this. Your aquarium does a lot of scientific research. It has a lot. This is what it's all about, and has a lot of really important education going on. And yet, when it comes right down to it, making these kinds of decisions, these are beautiful sentient beings, and you are treating them as such. And I think this is a part of the equation that people don't really factor into. Well, let's just put them in a sanctuary. Well, you're right. You have to really consider how are we going to do this for our beautiful family.
Well, there is an emerging element of the science that's called compassionate conservation. And the idea is that we do want to learn as much as we can about the lives of all manner of species. And it's not only confined to the so-called, charismatic megafauna like marine mammals, but it is particularly obvious and particularly emphatic in the case of large mammals like dolphins and whales, and also large mammals that are terrestrial like elephants. And in all cases, the idea is it's right to learn about them, but it's wrong to learn about them if in fact it's injurious to their lives. And frankly, there's ethical questions and all that, but I think realistically it appeals to the scientist in me, as I think it does to others, that whatever we do with the dolphins that are in our care, we somehow improve their life. We improve their quality of life and their capacity to exist as closely as possible to their natural lives. And that's gotten harder to do and frankly harder to justify in the modern era. I mean, what was right in 1970 or so, when the concept of an aquarium exhibit like the one that we have here was first designed, is dramatically different from what is right today. And for better or worse, ours was built to be a show tank, and at this point, that's maybe not the best thing for our message and our mission and our experience that we offer people here. But it's different, again, from place to place and from institution to institution. What I care about is giving a great home to these 8 dolphins that I'm not sure I'm ready to call them my family, but certainly I'd like to think of them as our friends.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important for people to understand how much you and your whole team are taking responsibility for your impact and your legacy, and your position as a vehicle, as a voice for change.
Well, I just want to say that we decided that we need to be more than an attraction. We need to be a place that is setting a standard for this century we're now well into, that is breaking down some of the barriers between the natural world that most Americans and certainly many humans are getting increasingly more disassociated from. I would never have dreamt that there would be a concept of something like nature deficit disorder when I was growing up, surfing and swimming in the ocean in California, or climbing trees, or shooting arrows at targets in the woods, and just all kinds of goofy things that seemed normal at the time. Now I realize we're silly as all get out, but they were in nature. And I think that's become harder and harder for a lot of kids to do, and I hate that. And I want to be part of the movement that gets people back to understanding how important the natural environment is to them and how much they are a part of that environment. And that's all part of trying to be more than an attraction and trying to really set new standards and bringing us back to the why. Why are we doing this? It's way beyond a single species. It's all about ecosystems and habitats, and that's, again, where we're trying to go.
Yeah. What do you think the dive industry needs to do to be able to reconnect to their why, and walk in the same shoes? Because I could take the words you just said and just insert, instead of an attraction, an activity. Diving's an activity. We're more than an activity. And then everything else you said after that about reconnecting to nature, reconnecting to the ecosystem, reconnecting to how we are part of this ecosystem, reconnecting to how important
Yeah.
this is all of the same stuff.
Well, I would answer that by saying I think that, we're trying to create, and others in our space are as well, a movement where we were just an attraction concept. When I think about the dive industry, I think for me, diving is a calling. And I wonder if there's a way to make diving be more of a calling for those who are coming into it new. For me, diving is a way for me to see a world that that entrances me. And we've all talked about why we dive and what we love about it. But the point is, you get to see something that is so completely different from the world we live in, while you get to fly through it, while you get to enjoy this incredible experience in close proximity to major predators that if you were in Africa, you'd have, three armed guards standing around you to see. It's a calling. And I wonder if that's one of the things that could be done here, that we could cast it more as really a way of living as opposed to just a diversion or an activity.
I absolutely agree. It is a calling. It really is. And when it's that calling is part of your mission. It's part of why you're here. And I really feel right now that our Ocean People tribe is gathering. And I don't know if you can feel it. I'm sure you can. It's palpable doing this summit and speaking to so many people around the world. And all of the tribe that has been called, we're all coming together. And it's a very exciting time to live in, even though we have to be brave to do things differently. We're used to being brave. We're divers. We're used to being brave, but we have to be brave to be able to continue with our calling, to be here at this important time, and to
Sure.
use our businesses as vehicles for change.
Yep.
And this is exactly what you're doing, and I'm so glad you're here because you are walking the talk, and you're a perfect example that our participants, our summit goers can look at and go, oh, I think I may be starting to understand this broader visioning and how important it is for me. Just even, like, you have so much fun. You have fun when you go to work.
Well, I do admit I get to do what I do, and I wake up every morning, and I'm one of those pinch yourself people. And it wasn't always this way, and I've got a lot of humility for the battle scars that I've attained in the years getting here. But it's funny thinking about this. That exhibit behind me, in another half hour or so, I've got to be suited up over there to greet a group, the National Wildlife Federation, which is having a special event in the aquarium. It's evening now, and I get to wear our Guardian full face mask and talk to them and welcome them to the aquarium. And yeah, I get to do exactly what I love, and that is a calling. And although on the other hand, I think people are starting to tug at my chair here because they know I've got to go get my wetsuit on.
Okay, no worries. Listen, thank you so much, John, and thank you, Kate and IT team, for making this call happen. I hope to see you next week, John, at all the stuff that's going on in DC.
I'll see you down there for sure, I hope. Thank you, Lori.
Okay, take care. Have fun tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.